LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the April 30th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 15 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use, media criticism, and political analysis show for you all tonight. As usual, my clips come mostly from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. I take clips from all the news analysis shows every Sunday morning. Plus, I add in some political comedy. I'll have some jokes from Bill Maher's monologue last Friday and a couple clips from his interview with Elizabeth Warren. I'll also have my personal highlights from the White House Correspondents Dinner that Donald Trump did not attend last night. Hasan Minaj's comedy routine I thought was really good, and I picked out about 4 minutes from the 25 minutes. You can see the topics I'm covering down in the video description. If you're watching as a recorded show, you should see time indexes so you can switch between the topics. It's basically the first 100 days of Trump and the first 100 days of the resistance to Trump. I've also put this clip list, a link to the clip list down in the video description. You can follow along with my notes on the 15 clips, and you can pretty much tell who's talking and which network and what topic each clip is about, sort of. But like I said, I want to start off with some political comedy, talking about the first 100 days. There were a couple sets of good jokes, I thought, in Bill Maher's monologue that I want to start with for Trump's first 100 days. And I will talk about the first set of those jokes, about a minute long, with you after we watch them together over here.
Give yourselves a hand for getting through 100 days of Donald Trump. Right? 100 days of Trump. It's like Lent if we all gave up reality. Yeah, they're big on this 100-day mark. Some people, of course, are disappointed at his lack of accomplishment. Vladimir Putin. All that work for nothing. But you know who thinks Trump is doing a great job? Yes, Donald Trump, I know. Who'd have thought Donald Trump? A reporter asked him to grade himself. He gave himself an A. Ooh, who would have knocked me over with a feather? Donald Trump giving himself an A. And you can trust that grade because he used to own a fake university. But he...
So I thought those were good jokes. I thought they were funny. I liked the punchlines, and it was also one of the two sets of jokes about the first 100 days, which was the main topic from the news shows. That's why I picked that one out. And you can tell me down in the comment section if you think it was funny. And I do think it was not as good as the second set of jokes, also about the first 100 days, but it kind of follows up on an analysis I showed you from Bill Maher on the panel discussion last week, where he talked about Donald Trump's three-phase pattern. And I'm not going to give away the whole three phases, but I will talk about it with you after we watch that 1 minute set of jokes, or it's sort of like joke analysis, I guess, from Bill Maher's monologue last Friday here.
But there does seem to be a pattern emerging here after 100 days that we can see. First, Donald Trump pulls shit out of his ass and says, so easy to fix, so easy. Then, phase two, nobody knew. Nobody knew it was hard. And then phase three, we go back to what Obama was doing. Trade with China, go back to that. ISIS, go back to that policy. The Iran deal, go back to that. Healthcare, NAFTA, all the campaign. All he talked about was not the worst deal ever. Fucking disaster. Now, you know what happened this week? He talked to the Mexican president. He talked to the Canadian prime minister. NAFTA's back on. Same thing happened when he talked to the Chinese president. Suddenly, we're on their side. He's like the Manchurian candidate, but you don't even have to hypnotize him. Just tell him he's pretty. You're all in.
So, I don't know, I guess that's kind of a funny punchline at the end there about the Manchurian candidate, but the analysis is actually not really humor, it's political analysis. I think that there is sort of this pattern to Donald Trump where first in the campaign he overpromised and said everything was going to be so easy, and then who knew, you saw Bill Maher explain it, but then I don't know if he's so much going back to the establishment or back to what Obama did. It's more the hard right Republican establishment, which is something Bill Maher, I think, said later in his panel discussion in a clip I'm not going to show. A little bit later in the program, when I get to the resistance topic, I'm going to show a couple extended clips of Bill Maher's interview with Elizabeth Warren, edited together. It's about 7 minutes long, and because I'm showing about that much of Donald Trump, and I think Elizabeth Warren may be the presidential candidate for the Democrats in 2020, so you may be seeing sort of the matchup Donald Trump versus Elizabeth Warren that you're going to see in 2020, assuming Donald Trump is even still president at the end of his 4-year term. But before I get to the resistance, I have several clips on the first 100 days, and even though a lot of the news shows covered it last week, they also kind of covered it this week. The one that was most consistent was NBC's Meet the Press. They kind of went through the litany of failures last week, and they did the same thing this week. And I'm going to show this 3-minute news analysis piece from Chuck Todd, where he talked about Donald Trump being taken over by the establishment, basically being the empire striking back, and how also you'll see some of the things Bill Maher said, the political analysis about how it was supposed to be easy, but it's not so easy. Over here.
Days is a ridiculous benchmark. President Trump this week certainly looked like a man eager to cross the finish line with some victories. But despite this week's flurry of activity on taxes, on health care, on NAFTA, the president has struggled to put some big legislative points on the board. He has won the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, rolled back quite a few business and environmental regulations, and he has stayed true to his promise to restrict immigration. But in what may be the most revealing moment of the week, the Republican House rejected his call for $1 billion down payment for the wall with Mexico. Like many presidents before him, President Trump came to town promising to defeat Washington. And like many presidents before him, he's discovering that the Washington empire knows how to strike back.
We are keeping one promise after another, and frankly, the people are really happy about it.
In Harrisburg, Pennsylvania last night, the president marked 100 days in office in his favorite element.
We're going to have the wall. Don't worry about it. Major tax relief for the middle class. We're going to get the premiums down. We're going to get the deductibles way down. We're going to take care of every single need you're going to want to have taken care of, but it's not going to cost that kind of money.
It's a stark contrast to this admission earlier in the week.
This is more work than in my previous life. I thought it would be easier.
The 100-day honeymoon is regarded, politically at least, as the easiest part of a president's job. On the campaign trail, governing looked easy.
So a lot of politicians said, you can't get Mexico to pay for the wall. I said, oh, it's going to be so easy.
You're going to have such great health care at a tiny fraction of the cost, and it's going to be so easy.
Presidential's easy.
But of the 10 major pieces of legislation Mr. Trump promised in his contract with the American voter, none have been accomplished. If Mr. Trump is still battling Washington, then Washington appears to be winning. Healthcare is stalled for the second time in the House.
I'm disappointed. I'll tell you, Paul Ryan's trying very, very hard.
The president's plan to overhaul thousands of pages of the federal tax code? So far, just a single sheet of paper.
We will let you know the specific details at the appropriate moment.
A White House demand to include a down payment for a border wall in any spending bill dropped.
Build the wall! We'll build the wall.
After promising to terminate NAFTA, instead, on Saturday, Mr. Trump signed an executive order which simply launches a 6-month review. Mr. Trump railed against so-called globalists during the campaign.
Hillary Clinton is the chief emissary for globalism. Wants to surrender America to globalism. A representative for globalists. You know what globalists are?
But this week, he called himself one, telling the Wall Street Journal, hey, I'm a nationalist and a globalist. And then there's the Russia investigation. It continues to hang over this presidency, with new questions this week about former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn.
When they say we didn't vet, well, Obama, I guess, didn't vet, because he was approved at the highest level of security by the Obama administration.
Well, we got a lot to get.
So I thought that was a pretty good analysis from NBC. They were basically the only program that did the analysis of Trump promises versus what Trump did in the first 100 days, both last week and this week. If you remember CNN, they kind of focused on the possible government shutdown that never happened as the important story and didn't cover the 100 days last week at all. Jake Tapper covered it a little bit at the beginning of the show. He said the State of the Union was deeply divided, and he talked about both Trump's first 100 days and the first 100 days of the resistance. And it's sort of a much shorter piece, and it doesn't go through all the broken promises like you saw on NBC last week and this week. You saw it on ABC last week. You won't see it on ABC this week, because I'll talk about in the next clip. But here's the CNN introduction on the first 100 days over here.
Washington, where the state of our union is deeply divided on day 101 of the Trump era. Where you stand on his performance so far depends on where you sit. His fans are as loyal as ever, and his critics just as loud. So as thousands of marchers packed the streets of Washington yesterday to protest the White House's refusal to acknowledge the scientific consensus about man-made contributions to climate change, which President Trump has incorrectly called a hoax, he fled D.C. for a more hospitable environment, one of his own rallies.
And I could not possibly be more thrilled than to be more than 100 miles away from Washington Swamp, spending my evening with all of you and with a much, much larger crowd and much better people, right? Right?
And the president touted what he sees as his accomplishments in his first 100 days of his presidency.
We're going to have jobs, and you're seeing them already. We've also been very busy on the legislative front, which we have gotten no credit for, and yet I am signing away. I've signed 29 new bills, a record not surpassed since the Truman administration.
We asked the Trump White House to provide an official to speak with us about the president's first 100 days in office. They declined. But I am joined this morning by Senator John McCain, Republican of Arizona.
And I didn't take any clips of John McCain, but have you noticed how many times since Trump became president that CNN's State of the Union has told us that they asked for someone from the Trump administration and the Trump administration wouldn't send anyone? Reince Priebus went out to one of the shows. Donald Trump went out to CBS. Vice President Mike Pence went out there, but no one would go to CNN. I don't know, but actually reminds me, I've been reading the live comments along the way. I noticed for some reason a lot of the live viewers didn't show up or didn't get notice of the live show coming up, and that's too bad, because I don't really make much revenue from these shows anymore, except from the people who are willing to do the super chat donations, because there's basically been no ads running against my videos in all of April. Maybe like 500 of the 10,000 views get an ad based on the monetized impressions. So I really appreciate this $5 contribution from Daniel. I don't know if you can read that. It was about Donald Trump's attack on the libel laws. Could that backfire on him because he lies about people, and so he could be sued for libel? And that's true, though. And that's a clip from Reince Priebus that I didn't take a Reince Priebus clip, and he talked about the libel laws, and I decided not to take those clips. But he kind of talked about how they might make it easier to sue newspapers for lying and easier to sue people for flag burning, or to criminalize flag burning, but that would take a constitutional amendment, and they basically have not been able to get anything passed through the Congress, so I don't see that as a very likely. It's just rhetoric. It's just like red meat for the base. That's my opinion, and so that's answering Daniel's question about the change in the libel laws, but that doesn't mean that Trump will stop attacking the press, and you'll see that in the clips from the Trump interview I'm going to show in a minute. But that was CNN showing how the first time, that was basically all their analysis of the first 100 days. But they didn't go as far as ABC, where Jon Karl was hosting this week, and he said, we're like too good to talk about the first 100 days. It's ridiculous, like Donald Trump says, and no, it will, like, no one's ever going to remember the first, it's all kind of true. But then again, Donald Trump, as Jon Karl mentions in this piece, did like raise the issue of all these things he was going to do in the first 100 days, but they don't say what they were in the ABC piece here, which is one of my criticisms. And also later in the show, they do actually start doing some 100-day analysis after Jon Karl has this like self-righteous attitude about how they're not going to do it. And my other criticism is, if you watched last week, ABC did a very long analysis of the first 100 days and gave a report card, which is what Jon Karl says they're too good to do this week, or at least on This Week, on ABC's This Week, guest hosted by Jon Karl, their White House correspondent, in this clip.
It's a town obsessed with milestones, and all week it's been all about President Trump's first 100 days. But for all the hype around that, as it turned out, day 100 of Donald Trump's presidency looked and sounded a lot like day one. There was the president delivering a hard-edged America First speech, his tone and his message as dark and foreboding as his inaugural address.
If you try to illegally enter the United States, you will be caught, detained, deported, or put in prison, and it will happen.
And just as they did on day one, protesters filled the streets of the Capitol, this time demanding action on climate change. The 100-day marker has been an obsession of those in power and those writing about those in power since Napoleon's reign ended in Waterloo precisely 100 days after he returned as emperor. For American presidents, it's been a marker since FDR passed a blizzard of bills in his first 100 days in response to the Great Depression. But let's face it, President Trump is right when he calls 100 days a ridiculous standard to judge a presidency. Of course, he elevated that ridiculous standard as a candidate by raising expectations for his first 100 days in a campaign speech at Gettysburg, no less. The truth is, history will little note nor long remember any 100-day judgments made in the midst of all that is happening right now. 10 years before he was elected president, Abraham Lincoln eulogized another president, saying, quote, "The presidency, even to the most experienced politicians, is no bed of roses. No human being can fill that station and escape censure." But the true judgment on a president's accomplishments does not come in the midst of political battle. It is not found in the polls. The true assessment of a president comes in what Abraham Lincoln called the calm light of history. So, in this show, today, we won't waste time with 100-day report cards. We will look to the next 100 days, or maybe the next 1,360 days until the next presidential inauguration. We begin with the biggest challenge.
So, I don't know, they were kind of getting pretty philosophical there, and there are like all these quotations to historical figures, and it seemed also pretty self-righteous, like I said before I showed the clip, especially considering the first 100-day report card ABC did on This Week last week, and also considering that they bring up the 100-day marker a couple times during the show. I'll show it with I think it was the Nancy Pelosi interview. Is that the correct one? I have to look at my clip list to, with the Nancy Pelosi interview, they bring it up. And anyway, the next three clips, I think, are this is Donald Trump actually finally going on one of the Sunday morning shows, not even Fox News Sunday, but he goes on CBS's Face the Nation, where, you remember last week they didn't do much of a report card on the first 100 days. And in this interview, he doesn't really go through the promises he made for the first 100 days. Now, one caveat on that criticism, I have to say that John Dickerson said that this is not the whole interview. More of the Donald Trump interview is going to be played on CBS This Morning. I think that's the name of the CBS morning show tomorrow morning. So I'll check that out, and I'll either update the video description or put a comment down in the comment section about whether they actually did ask Donald Trump ever about his promises in that Gettysburg speech, his contract with America, the 10 pieces of legislation he was supposed to introduce and fight for, and the only one he even introduced really was health care, and that went down in flames. So that's 10 big losses. We're not tired of winning, but John Dickerson didn't ask him about that, even when he said he was doing a good job there in the interview, and just asked him why he thought he was tougher. Well, I mean, you can see how confrontational you think John Dickerson is. I didn't think he was really that confrontational, especially, you'll see there's one phrase that Donald Trump uses where you'll see Donald Trump is not shy about being confrontational himself, and like calling the press names right to their face in this first CBS Face the Nation clip. And that's the name of the show, by the way, Face the Nation, not what Donald Trump calls it here.
Always a challenge, like life itself is a challenge, but it's something that I really love, and I think I've done a very good job at it.
You said in an interview with Reuters that you thought it would be easier. Why?
Well, it's a tough job, but I've had a lot of tough jobs. I've had things that were tougher, although I'll let you know that better at the end of 8 years, perhaps 8 years, hopefully 8 years, but I'll let you know later on. I think we've done very well with foreign policy. I think we've done very, very well with relationships with other leaders. I think we're doing great on trade deals. It's set, and I think we're doing well. I mean, our country is being out-traded at every single point. We're losing tremendous amounts of money on trade. And I think, actually, I've been very consistent. You know, it's very funny when the fake media goes out, you know, which we call the mainstream media, which sometimes, I must say, is you. But when the
you
fake...
mean me personally, or...?
Your show. I love your show. I call it Deface the Nation. But, you know, your show is sometimes not exactly correct. But when they talk about currency manipulation, and I did say I would call China, if they were, a currency manipulator early in my tenure. And then I get there. Number one, as soon as I got elected, they stopped. They're not going, it's not going down anymore, their currency.
But that had been true before. That had been true during the campaign. So.
No, not true to the extent that we're talking about, but much more important than that as to when. But, you know, it did stop, and I was talking about it all during the campaign, and I would say that I was the one that got them to stop. But forget that.
You were the one who got China to stop
manipulating with us. I think
currency?
So. During the campaign, I talked about
even
it
if
was
they were
one
doing
of
it
my
before.
No, they were doing it before. I mean, there was no question. I mean, they were absolute currency manipulators before. But somebody said, oh, you didn't call him a currency manipulator. Now, you and I are just talking about how he's working. I believe that President Xi is working to try and resolve a very big problem for China also, and that's North Korea. Can you imagine if I say, hey, by the way, how are you doing with North Korea? Also, we're going to announce that you're a currency manipulator tomorrow. So the mainstream media never talks about that. They never say that. And that's, you know, unfortunate. It's just, one of many things, John.
You're a negotiator. If you need something from somebody, you need China to help you with North Korea. Doesn't that send a message to China? We're not going to bug you about human rights, about intellectual property. In the South China Sea, we're not going to put too much heat on you. Aren't you breaking one of your own negotiating rules?
No, I think that, frankly, North Korea is maybe more important than trade. Trade is very important. But massive warfare with millions, potentially millions of people being killed, that, as we would say, trumps trade.
Let me ask you.
Okay? Do you understand what I'm saying? And if I can use trade as a method to get China, because I happen to think that China does have reasonably good powers over North Korea. Now, maybe not, you know, ultimate, but pretty good powers. Now, if China can help us with North Korea and can solve that problem, that's worth making not as good a trade deal for the United States, excuse me, right?
What do you know now on day one?
I don't know if that's true. It certainly doesn't seem like what he promised the American voters. And even though John Dickerson's questioning didn't seem that confrontational there, I think he did get in sort of a good point, or he made a good point as to what was a big flaw in the argument Donald Trump was making. And that's no big accomplishment, because there a lot of times it doesn't even make sense what he's saying, but he didn't really Donald Trump didn't save himself from that point that he's basically telling China, you know, you win on trade if you can keep North Korea as a, you know, if we're worried about North Korea, we're going to let you win on trade. That seems like he's letting China get a lot of benefit from bad behavior by North Korea, and it's not like they couldn't collude to like keep that going so that they get better trade negotiations. That seems like exactly what Donald Trump was saying. The stupid politicians are so stupid, don't know how to negotiate. That doesn't seem like I used to be a lawyer. I used to negotiate plea deals all the time, and so I know a little bit about negotiation, and that doesn't seem smart to me. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And this next question from John Dickerson on CBS's Face the Nation, I actually thought it was like a softball question, and Donald Trump totally blew it. It's like he showed himself to be kind of paranoid. Or that he like has these enemies in his mind. And well, the question is, what have you learned in your first 100 days? That's like a total softball question that he should be totally prepared for coming on one of the Sunday morning news programs after his first 100 days. And his answer is, well, I learned that the media is dishonest and that Congress is dysfunctional. Like, you needed to be in, well, like he's been saying that for a long time before his first 100 days. And yeah, I didn't think the follow-up questioning was that strong. And I'm amazed that Donald Trump tripped over the softball question over in this clip.
Now, on day 100, that you wish you knew on day 1 of the presidency?
Well, one of the things that I've learned is how dishonest the media is, really. I've done things that are, I think, very good. I've set great foundations with foreign leaders. We have, NAFTA, as you know, I was going to terminate it, but I got a very nice call from a man I like, the president of Mexico. I got a very nice call from Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. And they said, please, would you, rather than terminating NAFTA, I was all set to do it. In fact, I was going to do it today. I was going to do it as we're sitting here. I would have had to delay you. I was going to do it today. I was going to terminate NAFTA. But they called up and they said, would you negotiate? And I said, yes, I will negotiate.
That's all you've learned about the media? You knew from the campaign about the media. You said it all the time.
But the media didn't cover it that way. The media said, oh, I didn't terminate NAFTA. First of all, if you look at my statements, I said, if I'm not able to renegotiate NAFTA, I will terminate NAFTA. Well, I'll make that statement right now.
Here's a question.
If I'm not able to renegotiate NAFTA, we will terminate NAFTA.
Let's step back a minute.
Okay.
Presidents have to learn how to adapt. Every president comes into the job, it's different than they expect. They must adapt. Surely you've learned something else other than that the media is dishonest.
No, I'm just saying
adapt?
it was one of my disappointments.
Give me another thing you learned that you're going to adapt and change, because all presidents have to at this
Well, I
stage.
think things generally tend to go a little bit slower than you'd like them to go.
Why?
Just a system. It's just a very, very bureaucratic system. I think the rules in Congress, and in particular the rules in the Senate, are unbelievably archaic and slow-moving, and in many cases unfair. In many cases, you're forced to make deals that are not the deal you'd make. You'd make a much different kind of a deal. You're forced into situations that you hate to be forced into. I also learned, and this is very sad, because we have a country that we have to take care of. The Democrats have been totally obstructionist. Chuck Schumer has turned out to be a bad leader. He's a bad leader for the country. And the Democrats are extremely obstructionist. All they do is obstruct. All they do is delay. Even our Supreme Court Justice, as you know, who I think is going to be outstanding, Justice Gorsuch. I think that it was disgraceful the way they handled that. But, I still have people, I'm waiting for them to be approved. Our chief trade negotiator. We can't get these people through.
I want to get to
They
that.
are obstructionists. And you know what that's hurting? It's hurting the country.
Let me ask you about health care. Tucker.
So, that's the third time I've watched the clip. I've explained this before, that I watched most of these clips 3 times. There's like the first time when I'm watching the show, then the second time when I'm capturing the clip on my recording device so that I can show it to you, and then the third time I watch it with you while I'm broadcasting the show. And it was just this third time I finally came up with the idea that I think what may have happened there is Donald Trump had an answer prepared for why hasn't he accomplished all of his promises for the first 100 days that John Dickerson apparently never asked. And since John Dickerson never asked that question, maybe he used that answer when he asked him the softball question, what have you learned in your first 100 days? And instead he talked about all the people to blame for why things aren't going well. Well, first the press for not reporting all the good things. And did you notice his first answer there? He started saying, I blame the press for their misreporting of NAFTA. And then he talked about how he first said he was going to get rid of NAFTA, and then he got these calls from the president of Mexico, whose name he apparently couldn't remember, and then Justin Trudeau from Canada, and then he decided he would try to renegotiate, and then he stopped there, he forgot what the question was, which is, what did you learn from your first 100 days? And John Dickerson reprompted him on, blame the media, that's what you learned the first 100 days. And anyway, I thought that was a kind of paranoid, blame-ridden, unjustified blame placed from Donald Trump on the media and Congress for things that everyone knew. Who knew how hard it was going to be, I guess. But I have one more clip from this Donald Trump interview, and that's going to be, the first clip was a little over 3 minutes. That last clip was a little under 3 minutes. This one is also about 2 minutes 40, 2 minutes 47 seconds. That's about a little under 9 minutes of Trump, about the most I can take, having watched these clips 3 times. This will be my 3rd time. But this is on the Russia scandal, where John Dickerson asks him, why did you say the Russia scandal is phony? And first he repeats that line you heard from the Fox News interview in the news clip earlier, where he says, General Michael Flynn was vetted by Obama, so it's Obama's fault. And John Dickerson lets him get away with that, doesn't really follow up on that, and just follows up on, what's phony and what's not phony. And, I'll talk about Donald Trump's answer after we watch that final clip from the CBS Face the Nation interview with Donald Trump this morning. The interview was recorded yesterday and broadcast on Face the Nation this morning over here.
Said yesterday on Fox that Russia is a phony story. Which part of it is phony?
The concept of Russia with respect to us is a total phony story.
Meaning the Trump campaign.
Of course it's a total phony story. In fact, I just heard where General Flynn got his clearance from the Obama administration.
But you don't mean
Excuse me. And when he went to Russia, I didn't realize this, when he went to Russia, it was 2015, and he was on the Obama clearance. When General Flynn came to us, as you now know, he already had the highest clearance you can have. I think the same clearance as a president of the United States would have. He had this really high clearance. And by the way, they're so devastated because this only came up 2 days ago.
Let me ask you this,
why wasn't this reported months ago? But I watched one of your other competitors, and they were devastated by this news because you know what? That kills them. That's the end of that subject.
You don't think it's phony that the Russians tried to meddle in the election? You believe that?
That I don't know.
You don't know or you do know?
Well, I have a problem. You have Podesta, who, by the way, I understand has a company with his brother in Russia. Hillary's husband makes speeches in Russia. Hillary did a uranium deal with Russia. Nobody ever talks about that. But I don't know, because the FBI was not allowed by Podesta to go in and check all of the records and their servers and everything else that you would normally have to check. That's number one. Number two, knowing something about hacking, if you don't catch a hacker, okay, in the act, it's very hard to say who did the hacking. With that being said, I'll go along with Russia. Could have been China. Could have been a lot of different groups.
So President Donald Trump is ambivalent about, or not ambivalent,
no,
you're just
I'm
not sure.
No, we have to find out what happened. I'd love to find out what happened.
But you don't think it's
I
the
can
Russian
tell you one
system.
thing. It had nothing to do with us. Had nothing to do with this, and everyone knows it. And by the way, even my enemies on your show said we haven't found anything that the Trump campaign did wrong. But do you agree with that?
But there is agreement in the intelligence communities and other places and investigative communities on the Hill that that Russia was involved in the election.
Yeah, honestly, John, I'm okay. But why didn't Podesta and the Democrats, why didn't they allow the FBI to inject the server? They hired some company who somebody said some pretty bad things about to go and check their server and give the information. So they were hacked. Why didn't the Democrats allow the FBI? They told the FBI, we are not going to allow you to do it. Why did they do that? Why did they do that, John? Why wouldn't they let the FBI go in and check? And by the way, why didn't the FBI complain about it?
Mr. President, I think we're going to have to end it there.
Thank you.
More of our...
So that's the end of the interview. There's no more interview after that, even though they didn't show the whole interview on Face the Nation. So we know, at least in that segment, John Dickerson did not follow up on that incredible blame Obama for Michael Flynn. And by the way, I noticed in the live comments along the way, I got another super chat donation by someone clicked on that $sign during the live show and asked me a question about Trump, Russia, and Michael Flynn. I don't know if you can read that. It's kind of small, but it's from Care09, if that's how you pronounce that, asking if there's ever going to be any accountability for Russia and Michael Flynn and Trump, and whether there'll be criminal charges, accountability, impeachment. It looks actually like there are going to be criminal charges against Michael Flynn because there's this law that says retired generals who could be called back into active service, like General Michael Flynn, are not allowed to accept money from foreign governments except after getting permission from the Secretary of the Army, which, if you were watching the news this week, Elijah Cummings came out, even with Jason Chaffetz, they're the ranking Democrat and the Republican chair of the House Oversight Committee, saying Michael Flynn basically violated the law, and so he's at least going to be subject to criminal charges, and that means that there's a higher chance of there being some sort of independent prosecutor or some sort of plea deal where Michael Flynn, he's already asked for immunity, so that could go up the chain, and it could implicate other people in the Trump administration if there is wrongdoing. You know, there's Russian collusion that Donald Trump just said didn't exist. I mean, if it did exist, then that's one avenue by which there could be criminal charges against people all the way up to the top. As for impeachment, well, for people like me who lived through the Clinton impeachment, one of the lessons of that is impeachment is not like really a legal criminal matter. It's really a political judgment. If you read the Constitution, it's basically up to the House of Representatives to impeach and then up to the Senate to remove the president. And as long as the Republicans control the House and the Senate and they're willing to support their president, I mean, I suppose there's some circumstance where the Republicans might decide this guy is like too crazy, we need President Michael Pence, because of course impeaching Trump just gets you Michael Pence unless he's somehow involved in the conspiracy, and that is something of a stretch. So if you are looking for impeachment and removal, then you need the Democrats to take over the House, which impeaches, and the Senate that does removal. And you know, no matter how strong you think your argument is, it's really a political question as to whether there are enough votes in the House to impeach and enough votes in the Senate to remove. And I don't see that unless Democrats take over the House and the Senate. And even so, there might not be enough votes. But I appreciate the donation there, and you can donate during the live show by pressing that $sign, or if you're not watching the live show, you can become one of my patrons on Patreon. There's a link down in the video description to my Patreon account that I'm depending on more and more for the revenue that makes it possible or makes it reasonable for me to. This is the 4 years plus 2 weeks. Every single Sunday, I've given up 8 or 10 hours to bring this show to the world and to my small group of fans out there who I really appreciate, even when they just give me supportive comments or give me a thumbs up. So thank you for that. And having shown the Trump answer to those questions, or Trump's answers to the questions from John Dickerson, which I didn't think were that confrontational, but Trump's answers kind of tripped himself up, even though the questioning wasn't that harsh. I thought Chuck Todd did a better job of questioning, and Vice President Mike Pence did a better job of answering on some of the same issues. Here you'll see Mike Pence sort of in a softer way try to blame both the media and the Congress for any lack of accomplishment by the Trump administration. And then Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press actually lists all the things that Trump promised and didn't deliver in the first 100 days, which I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together over here.
He literally each and every day has been out there fighting to keep his word to the American people, and he's frankly been fighting, against the gale force wind of the establishment here in Washington, D.C., and frankly, fighting against the gale force wind of many in the national media who would constantly like to change the subject away from the president's relentless effort to keep his promises to the American people.
One of the big promises had to do with a ton of legislative action, and I want to put on the board, he called, these are the pieces of legislation he promised to at least introduce and begin fighting for. No one said he was going to sign all of this. That I will give you. Tax reform, offshoring jobs, infrastructure, school choice, health care, child care, immigration, ethics reform, military and crime and drugs. The only place where there's been any action actually in Congress is really on health care. So what's taken so long getting these other aspects introduced, or was it an overpromise?
Well, no, it wasn't an overpromise. And remember, this president has already signed more bills in the first 100 days than any president since Harry Truman. I mean, he's literally 13 different pieces of legislation that have rolled back job-killing regulations from the Obama administration signed into law, and he's taken executive action.
We're not on health care, and we're not on tax reform. I mean, I'm talking. We have not these. I'm talking the big signature pieces of legislation.
But he's signed over 30 different executive orders on virtually every one of those topics that you just referred to, and we're working with the Congress. I think health care reform, repealing and replacing Obamacare, is just around the corner because this president is driving relentlessly toward an agenda to make America great again. And I got to tell you, when we were out visiting a factory yesterday near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. You saw the big crowds, the thunderous crowds, the overwhelming support the president enjoys, virtually unanimous support among the people that supported us in last fall's election. But what was more inspiring to me even was as we walked the shop room floor, not just the business owners expressing enthusiasm for the president's plan to cut business taxes and cut taxes across the board, but the guys that had paused from working on the line to reach out to this president and just thank him for being there. You know, somebody said to me recently that everybody that puts on a steel-toed boot in this country knows they've got somebody fighting for him every day, and it's absolutely true, and it's President Donald Trump.
All right, let's get out of atmospherics. Let's get into some details.
So Chuck Todd, I think, did a better job holding Mike Pence to account for Donald Trump's promises, but I think Mike Pence did a better job coming up with, you know, the various platitudes that you would expect from a mainstream, or what passes for a mainstream, which is really sort of hard right Republican these days. That's my opinion, at least about Mike Pence and the Republican Party. You can give me your opinion if you disagree down in the comment section. Before I leave the topic of Donald Trump's first 100 days and move on to the resistance, the next clip is sort of a transitional clip that sort of answers the question, you know, why do I have this dichotomy? Why is it that it's either you're for Trump or you're for the resistance to Trump, which is a very divisive way of looking at U.S. politics at this point? Well, this next clip, I thought, was a very revealing discussion that Chuck Todd had on NBC's Meet the Press with Republican Senator Susan Collins and Independent Senator Angus King, who caucuses with the Democrats. So it's basically the Republicans versus the Democrats, even though Angus King is technically an independent. And they both talk about several things that are stopping bipartisanship. Why is it that Republicans and Democrats can't work together? Why is it you're either for Trump or you're for the resistance? Although, actually, last week I showed that there are some Republicans who are part of the resistance to some extent. But anyway, I thought these barriers to bipartisanship were pretty instructive and revealing, and they didn't really give solutions for them, which makes you think that maybe they're going to continue to be obstructions to bipartisanship over in this clip.
Look, it's going to be Pollyannish, and you guys are going to say the right things about bipartisanship, but let me ask you this. What are the hurdles to bringing common ground back to a case where a politician might see it as a reward, not as a duty that the voters will punish? Senator Collins, you first.
There are two big hurdles. One is the rise of ideological-driven groups on both the left and the right who are requiring 100% compliance with 100% of their views 100% of the time. And the threat for members is that if they don't comply, they will face a well-funded primary opponent. The second factor is that the polarization in Washington in many ways reflects the divisions in our country. More and more people are living with people who have the same views that they do. They're accessing news outlets that reinforce what they already think. We're seeing a growing intolerance on campuses for alternative viewpoints. All of that combines to produce divisions in our country that I think Washington reflects.
That was a pretty good answer, Senator King. What would you add?
I would add, those are on my list, but here's one that's sort of odd, and that is the Senate schedule. We leave on Thursday night, come back Monday morning. No one lives here anymore. When I worked here 40 years ago in the Senate, everyone lived here, their family was here. People literally don't get to know each other.
Right.
And that's a problem. You don't have relationships. Here's another piece that I think might surprise you. Over 65 of the current senators have been there 10 years or less.
Right.
And that means they don't know how to win. We're like a football team that's lost every game for 5 years. There's not a culture of success. Something doesn't work, you don't get the votes, you move on, and you don't go back and try to make it work.
You know, in fact, Senator...
So, like I said before, I showed that clip. Oh, Sandy's showing up. Maybe I'll take a picture of Sandy during this next clip. Oh, and she's getting herself comfortable for... She couldn't stand the whole Trump part, but she's ready for the resistance part. And like I said before I showed that clip, I think that both Susan Collins and Angus King, the senators from Maine, gave a lot of good reasons that are stopping bipartisanship from happening. But if you think about those reasons, it doesn't really give you a lot of hope that there's going to be any bipartisanship anytime soon. They didn't even really talk about gerrymandering, which is the first problem that Susan Collins talked about how that politicians in Washington are more concerned about a primary challenge from someone who's more pure than they are for the base than they are concerned about having to move to the center for the general election, because a lot of them, especially in the House of Representatives, are in safe seats. That's where gerrymandering makes a difference. You know, they're from the Senate, so I guess maybe it doesn't really apply to the Senate so much. But anyway, like I said, that is the last clip on the first 100 days of Trump, and now I have several clips. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clips on the resistance to Trump. Starting with a Real Time with Bill Maher clip, and then ending with my highlights from the White House Correspondents Dinner, Hasan Minaj's comedy routine. I took my favorite 4 minutes or so of his 25-minute routine. But first I want to show, kind of as like I said before in the previous topic, as an antidote to the 9 minutes of Donald Trump we had to watch, I want to show someone who is likely to be the Democratic nominee in 2020. I mean, I haven't decided on who I would support. I mean, it's too early to really support anyone. I was a Bernie Sanders supporter in the last election until Hillary Clinton got the nomination. And then, as I've admitted, I voted for Hillary Clinton, which means Donald Trump is not my fault. Not my fault. And I would be willing to support Elizabeth Warren, I think, but I still am, keeping an open mind. There's a lot of time to decide. But I wanted to show this clip. There are a couple things that I think are really interesting about this. First, I'm going to give away a little surprise. Sorry, spoiler alert. By the way, if you want to watch the whole video, the whole interview, this is sort of most of the last 7 minutes with a little bit of edit. There's like a minute or so taken out to try to pare it down. But down in the video description, there's a link to the entire video free on YouTube, just like the entire Bill Maher monologue is free on YouTube, and the entire Hasan Minaj remarks at the White House Correspondents Dinner is available free on YouTube. This is the last 7 minutes of Elizabeth Warren, where this is the spoiler, Bill Maher says the word Pocahontas, and if you watch it carefully, Elizabeth Warren doesn't really seem very happy when he says Pocahontas. And then it's really sort of this long attempt by Bill Maher to get Elizabeth Warren to criticize identity politics, because of course that's why Bill Maher thinks the Democrats lost the election. And after we watch this 7-minute clip, and I'll check out your comments for the live viewers, what you think about what Elizabeth Warren is saying and what Bill Maher is saying in this clip, and we'll talk about it after we watch that. It's a little over 7 minutes. We can watch that together here.
But I can see why the real Americans out there, the Trump voters, say a pox on both their houses. Because this trend you're describing was not interrupted by Democratic administrations.
Well, it was slowed down some. by Democratic administrations. And I want to be fair here. Democratic administrations are the ones who put some of the brakes on, who did somewhat more antitrust enforcement. And let's keep in mind, it's a Democratic administration that went for universal health care with Obamacare, or at least pushed in that direction, and Dodd-Frank, and built, my personal favorite, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Yes.
So now we have another Republican president who just presented another tax plan, which is, I mean, I've seen Republican tax plans like this, but not quite as brazen, because this one doesn't even pretend. It's just about, wouldn't it be great if rich people didn't pay taxes?
Right.
But he's going to go to a rally in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania tomorrow and tell his fans all about this, about how his kids are not going to have to pay taxes because they got rid of the estate tax. And they're still with him. They're not with you. Explain to me what that disconnection is.
Actually, I'm going to push back. I disagree with you. When you talk...
Well, his fans are not with you.
Hold on.
Come on.
When we
they don't like you, Pocahontas.
When you talk about what's really the basic pieces of a progressive agenda, raise the minimum wage, expand Social Security, reduce the cost of college so people don't get crushed by student loan debt, more, not less, regulation of financial institutions. No, hold on a second. Progressive taxation, make those at the top pay their fair share. America, Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians, vegetarians, Americans, by about 2 to 1, are with us on that. The progressive agenda is America's agenda. We cannot forget that. And we cannot.
But this is the disconnect I'm talking about. I agree with you. They're with you on the issues, and then they vote for him.
Well, then
what is that problem? And now, you know, I'm not a politician. I don't have to be nice. I say people are stupid all the time. So let's not say that today, because you are a politician. But don't they bear some burden for not the people, for not looking into this a little more closely and seeing who is really on their side? I mean, Donald Trump ran as a populist, and now he presents his tax plan. 2 Goldman Sachs guys get up there. Thank God we didn't elect Hillary with her Wall Street connection.
Yeah, exactly.
And present this plan on one page that basically is, you know, let's give all the money to the rich people because they always do what's right with it. You know, thank God for the rich people, because they take that money, they put it back, it trickles down on you, you lucky bastards. We've seen this before. The voters have seen it before. His voters are not young. They lived through it. How come they fall for the con?
So, look, I think that Donald Trump tapped into a real anger in America. People are angry, and let's face it, they are right to be angry. They are angry over the fact that young people can't get an education without getting crushed by student loan debt. They are angry.
But it's misplaced if they vote for him and not you.
So
this is, how do we solve that problem?
So
we all agree the anger is justified.
Okay.
But
let's do it. The first step is our side has to acknowledge the anger and has to say, yeah, people are angry and they are right to be angry. This is what I talk about
including white people,
book.
Right?
Everybody has to stop and say there is anger and there is good reason for
a lot of those real
anger.
Americans think that only Trump cares about them and that Democrats only are into identity politics. And sometimes it looks that way.
Look.
And since the Democrats lost every election and they don't control one branch of government, doesn't it behoove them to look at that?
This is the reason I wrote this book.
Okay.
I wrote this book. I mean, this is my life's work. This book ends on a very hopeful note. It ends. I went to Trump's inauguration. I watched. I wanted to see it. I wanted it burned into my eyes. You know, my view on this was if there was ever going to be a moment where I was like, oh, I'm too tired to get up, all I had to do is close my eyes and think, oh, God, I'm up. I'm ready. I'm back in the fight. But the next day, it's the next day, when the world changed. When the history of this time is written, sure, it's going to be about Donald Trump's election, but you know what it's going to be about? It's going to be about the day of the Women's March. It's going to be about the day we made our voices heard. And here's the deal. We have real evidence that it matters. In the fights over health care, remember how the Republicans in the House 60+ times had voted to repeal Obamacare? You remember how Donald Trump said, on day one, right? How many times did he say, on day one, we're going to repeal Obamacare?
Okay, so he lied once.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But here's the deal. We really didn't have the votes in the House or the Senate to stop him.
Right.
What stopped him was enough people across this country, and not just Democrats, who got engaged in the fight, who started talking about, are you kidding me? You mean you want to change the law so you could discriminate against people with pre-existing medical conditions? And when they actually saw the plan, knock 24 million people off health care coverage, raise costs for middle-class families, so you can give a tax break to those at the top, a handful of millionaires and billionaires? No way. And so I get it that the first version of Trump Care failed because for some Republicans, it was not brutal enough. But here's the deal. The rest of the Republicans were not willing to follow them over that cliff. And the reason is because people around this country made their voices heard. We got to tap into that. We got to magnify that.
And they need a leader. You know, I have to say, you know, when you talk, people get very excited. When Hillary stopped talking, they got excited. So, Donald Trump... Donald Trump today was talking about running against you next time. No pressure. Senator Elizabeth Warren, everybody. No pressure.
And they actually hugged after that clip, so I guess she couldn't have been too mad about the Pocahontas comment, but she did look like she was thinking about some sort of response. He never really followed up and asked her about the whole Pocahontas thing, but I think we might be hearing the word Pocahontas a lot more if we have a Donald Trump versus Elizabeth Warren contest in 2020. I guess we're already starting to think about that. It's a long way off. I'm actually more interested in 2018 and whether the Democrats can take back one or both houses of the U.S. Congress. And I'm going to show the current Democratic leaders in both those houses in just a minute. The other comments I wanted to make about that, I want to know what you think about whether Elizabeth Warren would be a good candidate. I think she does have some of the good poetics, some of the inspirational words that are good in a presidential candidate, especially compared to the more legislative, day-to-day business type people, the Chuck Schumer and the Nancy Pelosi. Those are the next two clips I'm going to show you. But of course, they're not going to run for president. No one thinks even Chuck Schumer doesn't think Chuck Schumer's running for president, I don't think. But actually, this next clip I want to show you, you can let me know what you think about that last clip. Oh, the one other thing I wanted to say about it is that thing I said before I showed it is I thought Bill Maher spent 4 minutes leading up to this whole identity politics question, and Elizabeth Warren never really answered it. I cut out the part where she started talking about her book and how she's the daughter of a janitor, and not really the answer to the question Bill Maher was asking, but I think he is much too hung up on that idea that it's identity politics that lost Hillary Clinton the 2016 election, even though she got more votes. And he kept saying, we have to, what the anger of white guys, let's, he really wanted her to feel the anger of white guys. And I thought that was a little bit much, even though maybe I'm just not angry enough as a white guy. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. Anyway, as I promised, the next two clips are the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, and then I'll show Nancy Pelosi in a minute. But first here, Chuck Schumer, Chris Wallace, all of a sudden gets confrontational, all of a sudden has a whole list of accomplishments that Trump has accomplished in his first 100 days, even though they never really talked about all the things he promised that he didn't accomplish. Well, they've gotten the talking points from the White House, and he's ready to go after Chuck Schumer. And this is also interesting because Chuck Schumer is kind of responding to the criticisms that you heard Trump specifically attack Chuck Schumer and call him names and ineffective, and even you'll see Chris Wallace ask him about leading the Democratic Party to doom, I think, possibly. Anyway, that's... and to give Fox News a little credit, they do show the march yesterday that was another one of these big resistance marches. And this is... I showed 9 minutes of Trump, 7 minutes of Elizabeth Warren. This is about 6 minutes of Chuck Schumer on Fox News Sunday this morning here.
Tens of thousands of demonstrators in the Washington heat Saturday protesting President Trump's climate policies on his 100th day in office. The president says he's willing to work with Democrats on health care and other issues. But the top Democrat in the Senate says Mr. Trump must change his approach if he wants help from the other side of the aisle. Joining us now from New York, the Senate Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be back, Chris. Morning.
You and the president have been in quite the war of words these last few days. Here's what the president had to say about you last night in Harrisburg.
Schumer is weak on crime and wants to raise your taxes through the roof. He is a poor leader, known him a long time, and he's leading the Democrats to doom.
Weak on crime, raising taxes, leading the Democrats to doom. Your response?
Well, look, the president, name-calling doesn't work. Let's look at values. Let's look at issues. I'd say the president's first 100 days have hardly been a success. He's broken promises to the working people of America, unfulfilled others. You know, Chris, when he campaigned as a populist against the Democratic and Republican establishments. But he's governing like someone from the hard right, wealthy special interests. Let me go over a few areas. On trade, he promised to be tough, backed off on China, backed off on Mexico. On Buy America, again, we have a good, strong bill. They've backed off that. A lot of the steel now and infrastructure and water is going to be made overseas. On health care, he said he'd cover more people at less cost. His bill does just the opposite. And maybe the worst is draining the swamp. His last days, he said Wall Street won't be in Washington. Well, there are more in this cabinet than others, billionaires. And there's such closedness. I think one of the worst things he did on the swamp is they're allowing lobbyists to work in the administration on issues they lobbied on, and they get waivers that are secret. So there's been promise after promise that's been either unfulfilled or broken. On infrastructure, we sent him $1 trillion plan. We haven't heard a peep out of him. We're willing to work with him on issues like this. So the bottom line is very simple. The president, if he works with us, particularly on issues like trade and infrastructure, we can work. But on the issues so far, taxes and health care, he doesn't consult us at all. He puts together a plan that's very hard right, special interest, wealth-oriented, and then says, the way to be bipartisan is just support his plan. That's not how America works.
But Senator, the Trump White House says a lot of what you say, and this is not new. You've been saying this for a while now. In fact, you gave him an F for his first 100 days. They say a lot of your criticism is just not true. And let's take a look. On creating jobs for the middle class, they note that he has signed executive orders to cut regulations and red tape, pull out of trade deals that he says hurt America, and to build the Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines. On draining the swamp, he's imposed a 5-year lobbying ban on administration officials and a lifetime ban on lobbying for foreign countries. You say he's broken his promises, Senator, but there was a poll out this week, and 96% of Trump voters in the poll said they would vote for him all over again. Only 2% said they would not.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's going to take a while for people to see this, but his popularity ratings, if you want to measure him overall, not just his supporters, but with independents and Democrats, are way down, the lowest of any president. And the point being here is that on so many of the major issues, they've gone at it alone. Have they passed a few executive orders? Yeah, they have. Most of those are studies on into the future. The few that were serious got knocked out by the courts. Have they repealed a few regulations? Yeah, but mainly for coal companies, for companies that want to take advantage of workers' rights. They have broken their promises to the working people of America. And Americans are seeing that. That's why his popularity ratings are as lower than any president in history.
But Senator, President Trump says one of the problems is the constant obstruction by you and your party. You know, back when Republicans were in the minority, you like to call them the party of no. Today, aren't you?
Well, let's take his biggest attempt so far, health care. That wasn't the Democrats. He tries to blame the Democrats, but he didn't need a single Democratic vote to pass it in the House. He couldn't do it. He couldn't do it twice. He ought to realize that they ought to back off repealing Obamacare. We've said over and over again, if he backs off repeal, we'll sit down and work with him to improve Obamacare. Let's look at his next major issue, the tax bill. It seems to be a tax bill that's totally aimed at the wealthy interests. Estate tax, get rid of it. You know how many people pay the estate tax? Only each year, 5,200 of the various wealthiest Americans who have states over $10 million.
Senator,
the pass-throughs, just one more. The pass-throughs on this tax bill would allow hedge fund leaders, top Wall Street lawyers, CEOs of major corporations to pay 15%, while their workers pay 20, 25, 30%. So he is not governing from the middle. He's governing from the hard right. That's why his regime has had hardly any major successes, with the exception of Gorsuch. If he changes, we could work together.
Okay,
but he can't just dictate what he wants, not talk to us and say you must support it. Country doesn't work my way or the highway.
You said one more. We got there.
So, like I said before I showed the clip, Chris Wallace all of a sudden had a whole bunch of slides to show one of his guests there about promises that were kept, even though they never really had really clear slides last week, and certainly not this week, as to the things Donald Trump promised and didn't deliver. On the other hand, I thought Chuck Schumer there, even though his delivery wasn't really that charismatic, if you were like scoring and taking notes as to all the points he was making, point after point, those were all really valid points as to things Donald Trump has done that differ from what he promised as, you know, a populist for the people during the campaign. That's my analysis of what you just saw. You can disagree with me and let me know what you think down in the comment section, but as promised, this next clip is much shorter. It's Nancy Pelosi. I wanted to show this introduction from Jon Karl, where he shows a clip of Nancy Pelosi basically giving Donald Trump an F on all these things that he didn't accomplish, that he promised, or that he should have been taken care of. And you remember from the beginning the Jon Karl clip where they said they weren't going to talk about the first 100 days, that it was ridiculous, but then they choose those clips and then they talk about Donald Trump's first 100 days. And then also Jon Karl asked Nancy Pelosi about the first 100 days of the resistance and the Democrats, and he draws kind of a false equivalency that hopefully I will remember to discuss with you after we watch that clip together over here.
The grades are coming due for President Trump after a historically dismal first 100 days. Budget, F. Creating jobs, F. Draining the swamp, F. Healthcare, F-.
And there's House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi giving her grade of President Trump's first 100 days in office. She joins us now in the studio. Leader Pelosi, thank you for being here this week.
Thank you.
So we heard you give President Trump an F-. What's your grade for Democrats during the first 100 days of the Trump era?
Oh my gosh, in terms of unity, 100% unified. That's how we were able to work with an outside mobilization, channeling the energy of the American people to defeat their drastic, horrible health care bill.
But if you look at our latest ABC News Washington Post poll, 2/3 of the American people say the Democratic Party is out of touch. That is more than say President Trump is out of touch, more than say Republicans are out of touch. Isn't the Democratic Party a bit of a mess right now, too?
No, it isn't. The Democratic Party is unified. I would say my own critique of the Democrats, we have walked the walk. but we haven't talked the talk. All we do is fight for America's working families against special interests that the Republicans represent, but that has not come across.
So you've said you think that Democrats can...
So I actually do think the Democratic Party is out of touch with its base, but the false equivalency that, Jon Karl talks about, Donald Trump being out of touch and the Democrats being out of touch, they're out of touch with different things. The Democrats are out of touch with their base and too beholden to corporate interests, the Democratic Party, while Donald Trump is like too out of touch with reality and facts and, basic norms of presidential behavior and constitutional requirements in some cases, as we were talking about the libel laws earlier. But so that was a false equivalency. I didn't think Nancy Pelosi's answer was that great, although I think Nancy Pelosi has not been that bad a leader in the House when she was the majority, the Speaker of the House, or as the Democratic minority leader. I think she's done a good job of politicking and keeping Democrats in line on important issues, which is what the job of a legislator is to do in that situation. So anyway, I have two more clips on the resistance. Both of them are not quite as dry as Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, although I thought the Elizabeth Warren clip on Bill Maher was also very instructive. Both these next clips are comedians. First, Samantha Bee held an alternative White House Correspondents Dinner, an anti-White House Correspondents Dinner program that I watched. I didn't take any clips from it, but there was a fake clip of a Jake Tapper interview of her, and then she did an actual interview with Jake Tapper over on CNN's State of the Union, where Jake Tapper actually kind of asked her about somewhat what Bill Maher was asking Elizabeth Warren about the identity politics or the social liberalism or smug liberals, and I wanted to talk about that a little more after I show you that clip, and then we'll get to Hasan Minaj at the White House Correspondents' Dinner himself for the final clip. But here's Samantha Bee and Jake Tapper this morning, after Samantha Bee did her alternative White House Correspondents' Dinner last night, over in this clip.
Although and you commented on this last night obliquely, you have been cited as not part of the reason why Hillary lost, but part of the problem, part of the liberal America's problem. Ross Douthat specifically wrote this column. Hillary Clinton's Samantha Bee problem. Did you? I didn't.
So flattering.
I didn't know that there was a Samantha Bee problem, but let me read part of it to you. The Democratic Party's problem in the age of Trump isn't really Jimmy Fallon, who you had criticized and others had criticized for being too soft on Trump. Its problem is Samantha Bee, not Bee alone, of course, but the entire phenomenon that she embodies, the rapid colonization of new cultural territory by an ascendant social liberalism. First, what's your response? And second of all, how does it feel to be, the face of the problem?
Oh my God, my name was in an article. It's me. It's not racism. It's just me. No, you know what? I'll wait for all that evidence to roll in, and then I'll make up my mind after that.
So just because there was no backup, it was just his...
it's one person's opinion.
But
one wonderful chap.
One wonderful.
He's
a nice man. But let me ask you a question. Does he have a larger? And you've addressed this on your show. So remove yourself from it. Does he have a point about smug liberals? I'm not talking about you, but is there a smug liberal problem?
That is something that I can't really. I mean, I just can't take responsibility for the way the election turned out. I just absolutely I can't. Is there a smug liberal problem?
You told her not to go to Wisconsin.
I don't think there is. Like, I do the show for me and for people like me, and I don't really care how the rest of the world sees it, quite frankly. That's great. We make a show for ourselves. We put it out in the world. We birth it, and then the world receives it however they want to receive it.
Fair enough.
What can I do?
Let me ask you about the act.
I don't know if that really was fair enough. I mean, in general, I'm a Samantha Bee fan. I like her show. I like her comedy. I liked her when she was on The Daily Show. I saw in the live comments along the way this comment from, is it Tony Hoffling? Is that how you pronounce that? Samantha Bee rocks. I agree with that, but I don't think she really rocked at answering that question. I think she was kind of hung up on like her personally as a smug liberal, although you heard Jake Tapper sort of awkwardly asking the question, you know, but take yourself out of it. Don't think about it. It's not about you. It's about the generic smug liberal. Not that you're a smug liberal, but, you know, the generic smug liberal that is represented by you in this article by this right-wing guy. What's his name? Doe Hut or whatever. That. Anyway, I thought that was kind of amusing. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I've been reading the live comments along the way, and of course I read all the comments posted on the recorded show, so let me know what you think about Samantha Bee there. And then I'm also a big fan of the White House Correspondents Dinner. The video I uploaded to YouTube that's gotten more views than any other video. I think it's like 7-8 million at this point of the almost 60 million total video views I've gotten on YouTube. Around 10% have always been, even over 10% have been this one video, like David Letterman makes fun of Bush in front of Bush, which was a year they showed a David Letterman top 10 list making fun of George W. Bush at the White House Correspondents' Dinner right in front of George W. Bush. And even though David Letterman wasn't there, which would have been optimal, it was the part of the White House Correspondents' Dinner that I've always liked since Stephen Colbert, I think in 2006, did this great job of really criticizing George Bush right to his face, and it gives a comedian the ability to speak truth to power, and I think Hasan Minaj did a good job of that last night, especially in terms of the press who were there. I'm not really going to cover any of the jokes he made about the press. He really made fun of the cable news pretty harshly. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. The entire 25-minute routine is at a link down in my video description. I'm going to show about 4 minutes of some of the jokes I really liked. More about Trump, where he was speaking truth to power to Trump, even though no one from Trump showed up. The Trump administration, not Trump, not his vice president, no one from the administration even came to the event, which I don't know. I think that it might be a little much, but or maybe not. But I think Hasan Minaj did do a good job of still making jokes about Trump and also about sort of free speech and the importance of free speech so that people can speak truth to power, which is something I strongly believe in. And I'll talk about that with you after we watch. This is about 4 minutes, 15 seconds, 4 minutes, 18 seconds actually, from last night's White House Correspondents' Dinner, the C-SPAN video available free on YouTube. This is like 4 or 5 jokes edited together here.
Welcome to the series finale of the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Oh, man. My name is Hasan Minaj, or as I'll be known in a few weeks, number 830287. We gotta address the elephant that's not in the room. The leader of our country is not here. And that's because he lives in Moscow. It is a very long flight. It'd be hard for Vlad to make it. Vlad can't just make it on a Saturday. It's a Saturday. As for the other guy, I think he's in Pennsylvania because he can't take a joke. Now, you know, a lot of people told me, Hasan, if you go after the administration, it would be petty, unfair, and childish. In other words, presidential. So here we go. I get why Donald Trump didn't want to be roasted tonight. By the looks of him, he's been roasting nonstop for the past 70 years. Historically, the president usually performs at the Correspondents' Dinner, but I think I speak for all of us when I say he's done far too much bombing this month. Now, a lot of people think Steve Bannon is the reason Donald Trump dog whistles to racists, and that is just not true. Ask Steve Bannon. Is Steve Bannon here? I do not see Steve Bannon. I do not see Steve Bannon. Not see Steve Bannon. Not see Steve Bannon. Not see Steve Bannon. Jeff Sessions couldn't be here tonight. He was busy doing a pre-Civil War reenactment. On his RSVP, he just wrote no, just no, which happens to be his second favorite N-word. But, you know, in the age of Trump, I know that you guys have to be more perfect now more than ever, because you are how the president gets his news. Not from advisors, not from experts, not from intelligence agencies, you guys. So that's why you gotta be on your A game. You gotta be twice as good. You can't make any mistakes, because when one of you messes up, he blames your entire group. And now you know what it feels like to be a minority. And because this event is about celebrating the First Amendment and free speech. Free speech is the foundation of an open and liberal democracy. From college campuses to the White House. Only in America can a first-generation Indian American Muslim kid get on this stage and make fun of the president. The orange man behind the Muslim ban. And it's a sign to the rest of the world. It's this amazing tradition that shows the entire world that even the president is not beyond the reach of the First Amendment. But the president didn't show up because Donald Trump doesn't care about free speech. The man who tweets everything that enters his head refuses to acknowledge the amendment that allows him to do it. Think about it. It's almost, what is it, 11? It's 11 p.m. right now. In 4 hours, Donald Trump will be tweeting about how bad Nicki Minaj bombed at this dinner. And he'll be doing it completely sober.
So, yeah, those were my favorite jokes from the White House Correspondents Dinner without Donald Trump showing up. I wish Donald Trump would have shown up. Maybe we'll do it next year. I like the joke that took a while before it sunk in. I don't know. It's sort of an IQ test. How long did it take you to get the not see Steve Bannon? I do not see Steve Bannon, not see Steve Bannon, not see, how many times did you have to say Nazi Steve Bannon before you got the Nazi Steve Bannon joke? I don't know why they groaned when he said that no was Jeff Sessions' second favorite N-word. That was there was a lot of gratuitous groaning, but that was mostly in the media jokes that I didn't show. But there were a lot of media bigwigs there, and they got roasted by Hasan Minaj also, that, like I said, I didn't show the attacks on the media, but I liked the way he talked about how he had this free speech right to speak truth to power, and that's what I like to see in the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I wish that Donald Trump had showed up so that he could have listened to the criticisms and tried to be self-deprecating and, give out his, show a sense of humor. I don't know, maybe there was that whole Catholic dinner. I can't remember the name, Al Smith dinner in New York, where he kind of bombed in his ability to tell jokes. I watched it. I thought it was not very good, so maybe that's why I didn't do it. But anyway, those are the clips I picked out for you. I appreciate those of you who showed up for the live program and gave your opinions that I've been reading along the way, and those of you who donated through that super chat button, who also the people who support me every month through the Patreon account. I have also listed down in the video description for the Sandy fan. Oh, Sandy just showed up again here. She walked out and she came back in, but I did a little 10-second close-up video of Sandy for the Sandy fans. Why won't it? Stupid thing won't import. It's stuck. Go import. Whatever. Oh, there it is. Whoa, that was scary. The aspect ratio was one of those things where the should have been the camera turn. Whoa, sorry, that was like a scary Sandy video to me anyway, but only at the end there did it kind of clear up a little bit, but sorry about that. That was not the correct aspect ratio. Maybe there's some reason it didn't import correctly, but anyway, that was some sort of weird distorted Sandy video to end the program, and that will be the last clip I show you, and I will be back next week. I've been trying to put together some edited, produced videos, but all sorts of stuff, what do they call it, IRL, in real life, keep coming up to make that difficult, but maybe this will be the week. If not, then I will be back next week with my Sunday live clip roundup around the same time, giving you the best clips and my commentary and criticism on those clips next week. Until that happens, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.